Welcome back to Viral Shakespeare. This is Dr. Rusty Jones, and I am talking today about Act 3 of King Lear. And wanted to start off in Act 3, Scene 1, obviously, and bring up a couple of important thematic issues that occur very strongly in this act. But I wanted to start with Kent saying to the gentleman some very important information. Just as a reminder of where we've been, Lear and the Fool have been kicked out of Regan's castle. They've denied him his retinue. They've denied him everything that he wants. He wants all of the titles and all the respect that goes with being king, but not the responsibilities. They've said, no, we're not going to obey you anymore. We're not going to give you the respect because you've given everything away. We're not going to keep you fed and put up with the nonsense of your knights, etc., etc. And so basically he has run off into a raging storm. Kent says to a gentleman in Act 3, Scene 1, some interesting information for us in the audience, that there is division. This is at about line 11 or so. There is division, although as yet the face of it is covered with mutual cunning twixt Albany and Cornwall. So the division of the kingdom, of course, has divided the family. It's now dividing the remaining parts of the family, Albany and Cornwall, Regan and Goneril. They're, of course, splitting up and beginning to fight with each other, and Edmund's definitely going to take advantage of the division that exists there. Kent gives the gentleman a ring and says, I want you to run this to France. Cordelia will know who it's from, know it's from me, the good servant, and the information that her sisters have begun to war with each other as their husbands are warring with each other will be very important news for Cordelia to have. So then we jump to a very famous scene from the play, Act 3, Scene 2. You begin with storm still. So the storm has been raging just from the moment that Lear's wits begin to crack with his daughters. I covered that in the last lecture. And it continues to rage through the last scene that I just mentioned. And the storm is raging still. Enter Lear and Fool, raging against the storm. Blow winds, says Lear right at the beginning, and crack your cheeks. Now, you know what? You need to have some sound effects, I think, with this. So here we go. Let's a couple of sound effects. Blow winds and crack your cheeks. Rage, blow you cataracts and hurricanes. Spout till you have drenched our steeples. Drown the cocks, you sulphurous and thought-executing fires. Vaunt couriers of oak-cleaving thunderbolts. Singe my white head. And thou, all shaking thunder, strike flat the thick rotundity of the world. Crack nature's molds, all German spill at once, that makes ingrateful man. Singe my white head. How appropriate. This brings up a theme that I want to talk to you about just very, very briefly. I've introduced it before. The idea here is, well, I mean, a common reading of the storm, of course, is that it is a sort of metaphorical representation of the rage and insanity that has overtaken Lear's mind, and so now it has physical expression in the outside world. And there's nothing wrong with that reading. That's absolutely fine. The one that interests me more is this idea here, this idea of nature. Okay. If you look up nature, and I'm a big fan of synonyms, as you know. So in reference to the storm as a manifestation of nature, as I've said, there's nothing wrong with reading this as a reflection of the rage and the oncoming madness in King Lear's mind. Yes, but more than that. This is, as you can see, just from the very nature of the scene, if you've ever seen it played, you've got an old man and a fool clinging to him, who, in the case of Lear, an old man who fancies himself, as I've written down here, as a king, who is capable of, as God's representative, ordering around pretty much everyone and pretty much everything. But now that he's given that away, all you really see is an old man and a fool raging against nature, ordering it around. If you read those initial commands from Lear, blow winds and crack your cheeks. That's what I want you to do. Rage, blow, you cataracts and hurricanes. Spout until you have drenched our steeples, till you've drowned all of the churches, till you've flattened the world and drowned everybody on it. Here's the thing. He can't command nature. No one can. All he is at this point, because of what he's given away, is an old man raging against the elements, and the elements don't care. he can't control anything in his life because of the amount of authority he himself has negated. And so all he can do now is rage against Lady Nature. Nature is usually gendered female in Shakespeare's time. Rage against Lady Nature, and Lady Nature don't care. Not a bit. As I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of synonyms. If you look up synonyms for nature, you get some interesting ones that apply to what's happening in this scene. You get temperament as a synonym for nature. Temperament is your your emotions and your behavior. In Lear's case, you've got rage, impotent rage, as I suggested before, and you've got oncoming madness. The storm, nature in this case, reflects the temperament, the nature that Lear has within him at the moment, this sort of impotent rage. Another synonym for nature is identity. We see here that since he has given up the identity of king, the identity of father, those who are supposed to be in charge of the welfare of the nation, the house, the family, the children, whatever it is, he's given all of that up so he can rage against this pitiless storm, but with no identity, there's just no connection, and so all he can do is rage. And then the last one is a synonym for nature is essence. And I think here the essence that we see in Lear is his essential humanity. That is his nature, essential humanity. And out in nature, storming against him, all we see is a bare, pitiless storm smashing against a human who can do very little about it, who up until this point has not really had to accept the powerlessness of his inherent humanity. But now in the face of a storm that just will not obey any of his commands, he has no choice but to accept it. So his temperament is rage, his identity is becoming basically nothing, one of the themes in the play, and his essence is as a weak, pitiful human being, which he's going to have to acknowledge sooner rather than later. The fool steps in and says, here's a knight, pities neither wise men nor fools. And that's exactly what I was saying. Nature is pitiless. Lear needs to find in his own nature, in his own temperament, his own identity, his own essence, he himself needs to find pity. And if he can, that'll be the door that opens himself to accepting a kind of essential humanity that before this he hasn't really accepted. He's wanted his daughters basically, to kiss up to him. He's wanted everybody to acknowledge his importance while he's given away or attempted to give away his own authority and identity. Pity, empathy, these are things that he's going to have to find in his nature. Nature outside him has none, and he has no control over it whatsoever. He continues to command the elements that aren't listening. Rumble thy belly full, spit fire, spout rain, nor rain, wind, thunder, fire are my daughters. I tax not you, you elements, nature around him. With unkindness I never gave you kingdom. So jumping forward here, I've already discussed the problematic nature of the statement, which I accidentally called a question in the last lecture, that I am a man more sinned against than sinning at line 59, which, no, I think he's not. I don't think that that's accurate. Lear says at line 68, my wits begin to turn in the middle of this rampaging storm, as Kent also has rushed in to try to help him. My question for this is always, turn how? For the worse? For the better? Could the two be together? Could a turn for the worse actually yield a turn for the better? He is certainly coming to a point of madness. Is that something that he needs to go through? Is this part of a process to discover and accept his essential humanity, which is going to bring with it pity, empathy, and all the things that he's lacked to this point? We see a little of this in the very next line. My wits begin to turn. He turns to the fool and says, come on, my boy. Pause. How dost, my boy? Art cold? Are you cold? I am cold myself. Where is this straw, my fellow? He says to Kent. The art of our necessities is strange, and can make vile things precious. Come, your hovel. Kent has said there is a hovel nearby, and I'll get into that in a little bit here. And we need to go take shelter from this terrible storm. Come, bring me to your hovel. Poor fool and knave, I have one part in my heart that's sorry yet for thee. This is one of the first times we've seen Lear actually be empathetic, to care about the comfort um, or discomfort, I guess in this case, of another human being. One who's followed him out into the storm and is trying to show him what service he can. That's the fool here, but also Kent to some degree. Maybe the madness is something that's going to help him open his eyes and realize something about himself. Jumping forward again, Act 3, Scene 3. We're flipping back and forth between Lady Nature storming unnaturally, violently at Lear and him being powerless against it, and some very dark natures of Gloucester and Edmund in the next scene. Gloucester saying basically, reiterating what we already know at line 8, there's division amongst the dukes. There's division amongst Cornwall and Albany. Okay, yes, we already knew that. And a worse matter than that. I have received a letter this night. 'Tis dangerous to be spoken. I have locked the letter in my closet. These injuries the king now bears will be revenged at home. There's part of a power already footed. So he's letting the audience know, and unfortunately he's letting his evil bastard son Edmund know that there is a power coming in to revenge the injuries against Lear, against Cornwall, Albany, Goneril, Regan, etc. And Edmund's going to make use of this information. He's going to rat this information out. He's going to have his own father declared a traitor. He's going to start plotting against the lives of the king and against his own father. Edmund is using this information against them. Act 3, Scene 4. The storm continues to rage. Kent introduces, "Here is the place, my lord. Good my lord enter. The tyranny of the open night's too rough for nature to endure. Storm still." Okay. Was it possible in Shakespeare's day to replicate a storm? Now remember, I've mentioned this to you. The Globe is an open-air theater. It's very possible that it rained a great deal while people were watching these shows. However, I also think that it's likely that if the weather was too bad, they might have postponed. So they're waiting on having good weather. So if you've got good weather in the Globe, which is an open-air amphitheater, how do you replicate a storm? Is that possible? Or do you just have the actors going, "Oh, blow winds and crack your cheeks. This is way too terrible of a storm when nothing's happening"? And the answer is you could, to some degree, in some very, very interesting ways. Part of the Globe's roof, for example, probably had wooden troughs in it. And if you roll a cannonball around those troughs, you get a very good replica of thunder. It is possible using flash powder or some semblance of flash powder. You could have lightning. You could have kind of rudimentary wooden fans to blow wind around and make a lot of noise. So all of that, in connection with the skill of the actors, could be very good at replicating a storm. And when we get to The Tempest, you'll see this again. At the beginning of The Tempest, you've got to have a storm. How do you do it with more than just the actors running around going, "This is a terrible storm"? Could you have special effects? And the answer is limited, but yes, you definitely could. And they might be more effective than you actually think. So the storm is raging still, but in the very presentational style of Shakespeare's theater, you've got an actor coming in and saying, "Ooh, we're inside now. We're inside this hovel." And Lear says, let me alone. Kent, good my lord, enter here. Wilt break my heart. Will my heart break? This is a little bit of a foreshadowing of the end of the play when either Lear says, "Break heart, I prithee break," or Kent says, "Break heart, I prithee break." Will my heart break? The answer is yes. The question, though, at the moment is, will his heart break to the point where he's actually able to feel more empathy for his fellow human beings, for his family, etc.? And I think the answer to that is yes, but he's not done with the process yet. "I had rather break mine own," says the good servant Kent. "Good my lord, enter." Lear then mentions at line 12, "The tempest in my mind doth from my senses take all feeling else save what beats there. Filial ingratitude." So I don't think he's quite there yet as far as his heart breaking, as far as breaking down everything, all of the hubris, everything that he has set up before. But he does mention the tempest in his mind, which is why the tempest outside is often read as this manifestation of the tempest in his mind. But the tempest in his mind is still locked, he says, on filial ingratitude. The fact that nobody that I've given stuff to is grateful for it. Again, I think you should ask the question of this play, sure, fine. You're the father, you're the king. There are things that you are owed naturally, but ultimately, why should I give you anything? You have set up this division of the kingdom. You have dragged us apart. You have set us at each other's throats. Why should we be grateful for this? So I don't think he's quite got it yet. However, that said, we do see some more empathy in Act 3, Scene 4. Lear says, line 23, "Prithee, go in thyself, seek thine own ease," to Kent. Which is interesting. You know, this is our shelter. This is the only refuge we've got. The king should probably go in first. Everybody should do things for the king's health and the king's interest. But Lear says, no, you first. You go in first. "This tempest will not give me leave to ponder on things would hurt me more, but I'll go in." To the fool, "In, boy, go first." Okay, so the fool as well. "You houseless poverty, nay, get thee in. I'll pray, and then I'll sleep." Those are two very important factors, and I don't want you to overlook them. Prayer isn't really something we've seen in Lear so far. We've seen him curse, particularly curse his daughters with sterility, which cuts off his own future, but we haven't seen him pray. That would be very beneficial to his soul and to his empathy, I think, and sleep. We have not seen that yet either, and the characters are going to remark over and over again, we need to get this guy to Dover, we need to get him to safety. If we could just get him to sleep, he might come back into his right mind, and that's exactly what happens. But sleep here, as it is in other Shakespeare plays, is a kind of metaphoric death and rebirth. And in this case, I think it's a rebirth of Lear's humanity. We've got to get this guy to sleep if he's going to be reborn mentally. Then we see Lear again show signs of empathy. Line 28, "Poor naked wretches, wheresoever you are, that bide, that put up with the pelting, the attack of this pitiless storm, how shall your houseless heads and unfed sides, how shall your bare heads and your skinny sides, your looped and windowed raggedness defend you from seasons such as these?" You know, how are people with nothing supposed to endure the terrors of nature? Something important for us to think about now. "Oh, I have taken too little care of this." That's right. That is self-aware. That is an awareness of a flaw in his nature. He has not cared for his people, for his house, for his family, for his kids the way that he should. He's becoming aware. Even in his madness, he's becoming aware. "Take physic, pomp, expose thyself to feel what wretches feel." You know, I should feel exactly the terrible things that the poor and downtrodden feel in my country, "that thou mayest shake the superflux to them and show the heavens more just." At that point, the fool comes running back in, and we are introduced to Edgar, Gloucester's legitimate elder son, who, because his younger bastard brother has been plotting against him, has had to disguise himself as Poor Tom, the crazy man. And he comes in yelling about, "Away, the foul fiend follows me," line 46. "Through the sharp hawthorn blow the winds, hum, 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 go to thy bed and warm thee." Lear's reaction is, "Didst thou give all to thy daughters, and art thou come to this?" No, of course not. No, he recognizes poor Tom as a lunatic, but he assumes that his lunacy is the same result as Lear's own lunacy, that he's given everything to his daughters, and he suffers from filial ingratitude. But it's a bit of a recognition of the fact that poor Tom is a kindred spirit. Another person who's been stripped down to their essence, in this case, a mad beggar. And Lear is heading that direction as well. Edgar, as poor Tom, continues to rave. I will leave that to you, and I wanted to jump ahead to page 213, where Lear asks a very important question at line 102. "Is man no more than this?" referring to the naked or nearly naked, beggarly poor Tom, Edgar in disguise. "Is man no more than this? Consider him well. Thou owest the worm no silk, the beast no hide, the sheep no wool, the cat no perfume." Here's 3 on us are sophisticated. I think that that's important because Lear is now looking around and seeing the people that he now has as his royal counselors. He's got a crazy beggar lunatic. He's got a fool. And he's got a servant who in this case is a disgraced nobleman. In fact, he's got 2 disgraced noblemen, Kent and Edgar, both in disguise, acting as his kind of moral guides or moral counselors, and he's got a fool whose job has always been to act as his moral guide and moral counselor. Boy, there's three that are sophisticated along with Lear. They've all been brought down to practically nothing inside of this hovel. Finally, Lear, in this scene, says, in this moment, I should say, thou art the thing itself, whatever that thing is, humanity itself, the essence, the lowliest thing itself. Unaccommodated man, I should say, man with no titles, no money, no prestige, in this case also no clothes. Unaccommodated man is no more but such a poor, bare, forked animal as thou art, poor Tom, he says. Off, you lendings, removing his clothes. Come, unbutton here. And he has to strip down to some degree. Now, clothes in Shakespeare's day are very important. They are symbols of office. They are symbols of authority. I've mentioned to you the sumptuary laws, which dictated what you could and could not wear. Clothes are a symbol of who you are. But they're also the trappings of society. They dictate relationships. Lear strips them off because they don't matter anymore. He's down to his unaccommodated humanity. No different from poor Tom the Fool or Kent. That unbutton here is also a foreshadowing for later when Lear is dying, saying, unbutton here. In this case, he has to get rid of the clothes that were symbols of the authority he no longer has in society. There, it's the symbol for a soul needing to get out of his body, in my opinion. Okay, just a couple of minutes left here, about 8 minutes left. We hear on page 215, during the storm still, at about line 162 or so, that Goneril and Regan are now seeking Lear's death, and we need to get him away out of the hovel, and we need to get him to Dover. Jumping ahead now to Act 3, Scene 6. For my students, I want you to pay very close attention to this scene. I'll be sending you some information on this. It features in an assignment that you've got coming up. But this is a very important scene in the hovel. So I thought I'd take a second. Hold this sign up for you here. Hovel. The definition of a hovel is a small, dirty, poorly built house. And that is where Lear is going to have his crisis of madness. I underlined the word house in that because I wanted you to pay attention to that. Could the hovel represent something other than just a dirty, broken down house? And I think the answer is yes, it does. The hovel is, and you guys can put your own readings on this, but to my mind, it's a kind of parody of everything that Lear used to hold terribly important as part of his identity. His castle, his house, meaning his lineage, his family, and all of the authority that goes with it, his kingship, all these were part of his house, the house of Lear. His nation is also his house. All of that stuff is gone. All of it is wrecked, and he wrecked it. And what has he got left? This broken down old shack, this hovel. It's a perfect representation of what he himself has created out of his house. I mentioned to you before that a house divided cannot stand. Well, this one hasn't. It's collapsed, and it's become a shack, and that's where Lear is now, to have this crisis of identity, this crisis of essence, as expressed in madness. As I've already mentioned, in this metaphoric microcosm of Lear's mind, this broken down shack, which is all that's left of his identity and essence, you've got basically here a fool and, as I mentioned, two disgraced noblemen. And these are the only guides that he has through his madness. And for my students, I want you to go back and also look at Act 3, Scene 6 in the quarto version, even as you read Act 3, Scene 6 in the folio version, and I want you to think about the differences that exist there. I think they're tremendously important. I'm not going to necessarily talk about them here, possibly later, but I wanted to remind you that there are stark differences. In Act 3, Scene 6, the difference between the quarto and the folio are particularly stark. So I want you to pay attention to that. I'll just leave that there for now. I also want to mention that in Act 3, Scene 6, this is the last time that the fool is going to speak. The last line that the fool says, let me jump forward to it there. It's at about line 45, 46 or so. Lear says, make no noise, draw the curtains, so, we'll go to supper in the morning, which of course is crazy, you don't do that. And the fool says, and I'll go to bed at noon, which is equally crazy. To Lear's crazy because you don't do that either. And then he's gone. He's just gone from the play. Now, something else you may want to write about or think about is, where did he go? I've seen productions where Goneril and Regan's forces, definitely outside of the text itself, chase the fool down, grab him, and hang him. One production I know of, the fool was left hanging there in the middle of the stage all through the act break. So imagine people enjoying their chalk ices while this poor actor sits there swinging during the whole act break. Very, very pleasant. Other times he simply is gone, and his disappearance is not really commented on until you get to the end of the play, where Lear says, and I'm not going to spoil the whole thing yet, but he does say, as he's enduring the worst moments of his life, "And my poor fool is hanged." A lot of people think that that's a reference to what happened to the fool who vanishes in Act 3, Scene 6. Others think that "my poor fool is hanged" refers to, spoiler alert, Cordelia, who was hung in her prison cell, and Lear has cut her down and brought her back on to the stage. And the fool is a kind of term of endearment. Where I want to end today is by saying I think the two things are not necessarily something that you have to separate. Because the moment Cordelia, in the first act or so of the play, expresses herself as a kind of moral guide to her father's poor decisions and his oncoming madness, she goes off with France and she vanishes with the King of France and vanishes. Very soon after, the fool comes in and acts as a moral guide to Lear. Then in Act 3, Scene 6, the fool vanishes. And guess who comes back in soon after that? Cordelia, as his moral guide, and to some degree, the person who will bring him back to empathy and pity. This is probably done for a very logical reason. In Shakespeare's day, the company frequently double cast their parts, and so it's very likely that the actor who played Cordelia then went off stage and changed into the fool's costume and came back on as the fool, and then changed and came back on as Cordelia. I think that that's, the most reasonable explanation for that. On the other hand, I think that it's also incredibly thematically smart to do something like that, because you've got these moral guides who are trying to guide Lear to a kind of self-awareness of his true human identity, but through very different methods. Cordelia by being blunt and honest and still loving, and the fool, who does love Lear, mocking him, satirizing him, attacking him, singing songs to him to try to bring him to self-awareness of his mistakes. And then Cordelia coming back in and offering that loving, direct nature that she offered in Act 1. The same figure offering all of this guidance to Lear, and the same actor doing it. So it isn't that the fool isn't necessary for the rest of the play after Act 3, Scene 6. It's just that Cordelia is coming back in. So you've got another guide, or maybe the same guide, depending how you want to think about it. All right, I will continue this. I will finish off Act 3 next time. Go on into Act 4 of Lear. I hope you enjoyed it. Please remember, stay well, stay safe, and I'm thinking about you.